Hello, everybody, and good morning. Today is what is it? 13th live stream for Reef Automation. I see we got some new people in there. We also have our regular people. Let's see, we got Brian and Ron and Ravi and Coral Lovers and Fellow Reefer. We got, let's see, Courtney finally able to post. That's wonderful to see. We got Aaron, of course. We got Gary, Scott, Eddie, producer Reef. Nice to see everybody in here today. For those that weren't on the stream this week, we had a impromptu stream on converting a classic to a newer Apex, and we ran into a couple issues, but we got through it. For those that haven't seen the video, it's up as a live stream. Kind of go through a whole entire system where we got the classic onto the Apex, and it wasn't too bad once we got through it. Coral lovers need more videos. Just tell me what you want, and I'll make a video. Um, I got a couple things I'm going to be doing today that I might be videotaping. I don't know yet. Um, I am going to redo my entire wire management on my wall in my garage with a cabinet, which is going to be pretty cool. Um, and I'm going to be replacing my return pump, and I'm adding an EB832 to the system, so that way I can help you guys out with 832 questions. Uh-oh, Desert Reef Aquatics has entered. Everybody, hide your kids. Um, so today we are going to talk specifically about anything you guys want, but um, important automation equipment. And we're going to kind of go through like maybe a top 10 of my personal important reef automation equipment. And of course, I'd like to have everybody in the chat ask questions, and we're going to go through um, answering as many as I can get to. Um, so I'm sure all of you are wondering what we are going to be giving away today. I didn't want to announce it because I thought it'd be fun to surprise everybody. So today we are going to be giving away a Poseidon Reef Systems phytoplankton kit. Now, for those that don't know what that is, I did a video on mine at my house, and I'm going to actually go through it today and show you how to use it. You're going to get an entire kit, which is going to be the giveaway today. So let me switch over to my computer so you guys can kind of see what it is. The kit you're going to get, whoever the winner is going to get the single kit, which is going to come with one bottle. It's going to come with everything you need to get started making phytoplankton. So you're going to get a single 3.5-inch liter tank, and you're going to get all of the supplies you need, and you're going to get some phytoplankton to start. You'll get an air pump. You'll get everything you need to get going. Retail value of this system is about $150, just to give you an idea. Let me see if I can even show you the system. Here it is. So this is the system I'm going to be giving away. We're going to get you a pump. We're going to get you a starter culture. And yeah, so this is the kit you're going to get. And that's what I'm giving away today. All right. And like I said, we'll go over it a little bit in detail as we go through the stream today. But it's a really nice kit. I've been using it, and I actually dose. And whoever wins the kit can, of course, get additional parts from them. The owner, Elliot's really nice. You just contact him. He'll tell you what you need to get set up for dosing. You can look at my videos and see how I'm doing it. You'll just need a power splitter, um, and that's about it. A power splitter and an air splitter to get an additional container, which you would use for dosing. Eddie would like a beginner's guide to virtual outlets. I can go through that today, absolutely. That's not a big deal. Today's kind of a up in the air type stream. We're going to go through some automation, but I didn't have a specific topic really in mind, more just answering questions, showing people stuff that they're interested in. For those that are new to the stream, in order to be entered into the contest, you have to ask a question. I prefer you ask an automation question, and you have to say the magic phrase that everybody has said in there. One of the other requirements is you must be part of our Facebook group. The reason you must be part of the Facebook group is that's how I'm able to get to you, first of all, talk to you and get you the product or whatever I'm giving away. And it allows me to what's the word I'm looking for? Advertise a channel and show people that whatever you're getting, you get to show pictures and show, that I'm giving away stuff. Um, you mean that's the system I'm going to win today? Yeah, Desert Reef, I already deleted you from the contest. And another thing that I wanted to bring up while we got people here is every stream I get a lot of Facebook messages, and I would appreciate if you guys could wait till the end of that. For some reason, every time I do a stream, I get a bunch of questions in the Facebook group and the Facebook messaging. So if you don't mind, just ask them in the stream, so that way when people look at them later, they can see the questions that were in the stream and I can answer them live. If you ask them in Facebook, and I ask them after, unfortunately, people miss out on possibly some important questions and answers that would be helpful to them. So let's see what we got here. We got Anthony. Welcome to the stream, sir. It's nice to see you. Slee Stack, nice to see you. Been here a few times. Chris Howell, how's it going? Just ignore everything Desert Reef Aquatic says. Okay. What's going on, Corwin? All right, so we had a couple questions already. Let's see, how can I add a webcam to Apex Fusion? We can go through that, and we can go through virtual outlets. So for those that are arriving a little bit late, we are giving away a phytoplankton kit, is what we're getting by Poseidon Reef Systems, which is right here. Okay, so let's open up some Apex stuff. And we'll show you a few things. Cameras are very interesting. A lot of people have asked about cameras. I don't use a camera, so let's pop it in here. This is the tile for camera. It's a little fish icon here. Okay, go up to here. Okay, so this is important to understand. The camera that you buy will have to be one of these type of cameras, which is a HTTP live streaming type camera, a MPEG-4 or what we call an RTSP feed. Most cameras don't do OGG, and there's only, I think, one camera on the market that does WebM. So what you need to buy is a camera that supports either HTTP live streaming or an RTSP live streaming type camera. There aren't many retail cameras that are on the market that will do it. For instance, Ring cameras will not do it. Nest cams will not do it. I believe Waze cameras would be probably your best bet. They seem to work the best from what I'm told. I don't use this, but that's what type of camera you need to find. You need to find a JPEG camera or a Waze camera. Um, and usually, if you just research, will it do the MJPEG or will it do the RTSP? That's how you're able to find out if it'll work. Um, Again, I don't know much about the cameras. I don't do them myself, but I know Waze is a good one just to kind of get you out there. I don't know if Arlo will do it, Ron. You'd have to check. Um, we can probably check it right now. Arlo, HTTP stream. Um, yeah, there we go. RTSP live stream for Arlo cameras. This will work. If it has an RTSP stream, it will work. Um, yep, the RTS stream is encrypted, so it will not work. So that's the problem, is you need to find an RTSP stream that is not encrypted or an HTTP stream that's not encrypted. So I hope that answers your question. Um, why no GHL tips? T. Henry asked that question. I don't work with GHL. It's not that I can't help you with GHL. I'm a programmer by trade, but we don't really work with GHL in the channel much. Um, it's just not my cup of tea, I guess you could say. They make a lot of good products. Don't get me wrong, but as I'm sure most people could tell, we mostly work with Apex on this channel. Um, let's see. See if we have any other questions up here. We'll do virtual outlets next. Yes, you can use a Hikvision camera. So with switching return pumps to the 15, plugs into one link. That's right. When you dose live foods, does it stay in the tubing to the aquarium? Is that concerning? Does it rot? Jessica, Brian Bench was on my stream last week, and we kind of went over that. I think he's in the stream as well. He could probably answer you um, how he does with it. Let's see. Mark S, welcome. Carter Freefer, welcome. What dosing pumps do you recommend other than dose? I run a Versa pump, which I'm probably going to be removing because I have no use for it now, so I'll probably be giving that away. Versa pumps are great. Um, let's see. People have really liked the Coral Box dosers. I personally had some issues with them getting bubbles in them, so I don't recommend them, but people have said they're really good. Can you repurpose an old cell phone? But I've not tried to integrate those with Apex. Can you repurpose old cell phones? I don't understand that question. I'm sorry. Yeah, the BRS doser, Brian just said, that's a good one. The one thing I don't like about the BRS doser is they're very slow. So if you want to do something quickly, you want to dose like 100 milliliters in, I don't know, 10 minutes, that would not be a good choice. Someone had asked how much Fido am I dosing? I dose 50 milliliters a day all throughout the day. On virtual outlets, can I set up manual dosing on my dose or do I use something else? Noticing lately my Trident control dose isn't keeping up sometimes. With the Trident control dosing, you can increase the percentage, which would hopefully be able to keep up with you. I hope that made sense. But can you set up manual dosing on the dose? So you could use profiles for that. You can go up there and make a profile which would have a certain dose, and you could have it so if your Trident was to, for some reason, give you a low value, you can have a profile turn on, which would override the dose. Not a great plan, but it would work. BRS dose are coming in 1 point, and oh, they do make a 50. That's right. Not a question response to your camera types. I've repurposed an old cell phone to view my, but independent of the Apex. I see what you're saying. Yeah, the cell phone camera, I would have to believe, unless you have some type of software to produce an HTTP stream or produce an RTSP stream, would not work with the Apex. Okay, so let's show you virtual outlets. I use a ton of virtual outlets. Um, every single thing here that you see on the left is a virtual outlet. Reef maintenance, reef pick, reef maintenance, or fish maintenance office. These are all virtual outlets. A couple other virtual outlets. RO status is a virtual outlet that I use. I also have, let's see, if you go into here, pretty much every outlet you see here is a virtual outlet. Skimmer full, leak fish, fish flow, reef elemental low. These are all virtual outlets. Office low, reef low, office high. So those are all virtual outlets, okay? James Field, there is no module for the camera. It's just built into the Apex. I posted on Facebook Reef a video that I have a problem with. Can you check later and let me know what's wrong with it? I will try. What if we submerge Dobe camera below the surface of the water, but not submerge it? Will give you a live view of the iPhone app. Yeah, like I said, as long as you, yeah, as long as it has an HTTP feed or an RTSP feed. How many virtual outlets can you make? You can make a ton of them. I don't believe there is a cap, as far as I know. Okay, so let me explain what a virtual outlet is for Ron there and the rest of you guys, and why we use them, because they are very important for certain situations. So I have a maintenance mode right here. It's called Reef Maintenance. This is a virtual outlet that I created, and I'm going to teach you guys where to go to make the virtual outlets. You know it's in a virtual outlet because it'll have a CNTL before it. Okay? So what this virtual outlet is, it's strictly off all the time, okay? It only comes on if my breakout box tells me to turn on the maintenance mode, okay? So here's the virtual outlet. It's called Reef Maintenance. It's always off, okay? Now, I go down to my reef pump, for instance, and you will see if my reef maintenance mode or my switch or my virtual outlet in this case is on, I want you to turn off my pump. So what that means is anytime I go up here, I'm not going to do it live, but anytime I go up here and turn on my reef maintenance outlet, it turns off my pump. It also turns off a series of other things. So for instance, if I go over to my waves, to my vortex, and I go over to the advanced tab, there it is. If output reef maintenance is on, then off. So what that means is I have a virtual outlet that specifically is meant for maintenance. So that way I don't have to go through every single thing and turn it all off. I don't have to use a feed cycle either, because on a maintenance mode I might be in maintenance for 2 hours. So I need to be able to turn it off and on manually. Ravi, I am using a Harry Singer's box, which I did a video on, and there is a non-momentary that stays high all the time or stays on all the time, and that's what I'm using the maintenance mode on that switch right there. Okay? So again, when that's closed, it turns on my maintenance mode, okay? And that's how I use it. Is the breakout box the same as the switches I see being hooked up? Yes, James, that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You can use a momentary switch for feed mode. So that's another virtual outlet. So I'll show you that one. So let's say I have a special feed cycle that I've programmed to a button. Unfortunately, you can't use the feed buttons here because those are built into the Apex. So what you need to do is you need to go over to here and you need to actually make a special virtual outlet for Reef feed, which would be the momentary press. Okay, so if I go over here to Reef feed, here's my control or my momentary press right here. So when that button or that breakout box is programmed, it'll turn on, and then once it's released, it'll turn off, but the defer statement keeps it off for 15 minutes. So that's how the momentary press works on one of my breakout boxes. Okay. So that's another way of doing a virtual outlet is for momentary presses. You'll see I have something called Reef Pick. If I go in here, you will see it's always off, right? Now, if I go down to where it's actually programmed into my lights here. So if I go to lights, it's pretty neat how I did this. So this is my normal light schedule, but let's say I want to take a picture of my fish tank. And the best way to take a picture of the fish tank is either to put a filter on your camera or to just change the spectrum to a less blue spectrum. So what I've done here is if Reef Pick is on, which means if that virtual outlet's been on or turned on, I want you to then change it to what's called light pick. Now, people have asked, what's the reason for profiles? Well, here's a reason for a profile. A profile will override your entire program right here. So light pick is a profile. So if output Reef Pick is on, so if my virtual outlet has been turned on, I want you to change my lights to light pick, which will completely override my schedule. Now, if I go over to my profiles, which is the folder button up here, you will see I have a profile called Lights Pick. If I click on that, this is my spectrum for my, I believe this is 10K. So it removes most of the blue so I can take a picture. And then when I'm done taking a picture, I just go back to that outlet, turn it back to auto or turn it back to off, and it then goes back to my schedule. So that's a way that you can use profiles and use a virtual outlet together. So let me look at some of the questions. What's the best way to use the Apex with a calcium reactor for controlled dosing with a dose? And what other equipment would I need to do this the right way with safety backup? Okay, that's a big one, Mr. Producer Reef. I don't recommend running a calcium reactor through the dose, even though I know people do it. I I don't recommend it. The reason I don't recommend it is because generally you're going to need a calcium reactor to be continuous in a general sense. So I don't think you want that dose to be continuous. It'll wear out the pumps. I hope I'm giving you a good answer, but I just don't recommend it. And what other equipment would I need to do this the right way with a safety backup? Well, anything you do with a dose, and I do with a dose, I put a leak sensor underneath it, and it'll just tell me if something is leaking. That's really the only way. You also, of course, can put a if you have a Trident, of course, if your alkalinity starts to go up real high, have it turn off the dose or turn off whatever the pump is. If the pH was to get really low in the calcium reactor, you want it to turn off the pump because that means it's feeding a lot of high alkalinity water into the tank. Let's see. I have something new share that I learned from Neptune in your email. If you ever have an alarm that you don't want temporarily, instead of deleting it, move it to above the set code line. Yes, it will not register until you move it down below that. That's correct. Never really used that, but yeah. How many breakout boxes can you hook up to the one Apex? You can hook up one breakout box to one Apex. However, if you have a PM1 or you have a PM2, that also has a breakout box connection, so you could have multiple breakout boxes. Once again, Desert Reef Aquatics, not saying anything important. While then I use my virtual outlet, it turns off but ATA turns off only for when. Why then I use my vert to turn off? Coral Lover, you'll have to explain that a little bit. I don't understand. I'm sorry. Uh, I use profiles to program my wavemaker to have it run. Yep, that's exactly another reason to use profiles. Uh, how would you prevent a dosing pump like Versa from dosing too long? Well, unfortunately, there's not much you can do other than what I said earlier about Producer Reef's question, which was you can turn off the outlet that the Versa is on if you see a low pH or a high pH or a high alkalinity or a low alkalinity, then you can turn off the pump completely power wise. There's really no other way to do that. Um, you know, other than, of course, if there's a leak, that'd be the other thing. And that's another reason why I'm getting rid of my Versa. I'm trying to go everything Neptune now. I just find it easier. Brett, yes, there's a big difference between a breakout box and a 24 ounce. So a breakout box is what we call in my industry and what I do for a living as a contact closure. What a contact closure is, if you have a wire here, you have a wire here, you connect them. That's what a breakout box is. It's a contact closure. Think of it like an alarm sensor. So if you have a sensor on the wall and it knows when there's an alarm when that wire touches the other wire. So that's your breakout box. So when it's connected, it's on. When it's disconnected, it's off. A 24 out is physically a power connection. So it's actually providing 24 volts to something. So it's what it's doing is it's connecting that connection that I just told you, but it's producing 24 volts. So it's doing the complete opposite as a breakout box. A breakout box is figuring out when something's connected. A 24 volt out is connecting that connection to give you the 24 volts. When I unlock my tile button, there are 6 switches. Yep, that's your breakout box, Gary. Can Versa be controlled remotely? No, not currently, unfortunately. Can use voltage monitoring. Um, you really can't use voltage monitoring. I guess you could. I mean, they use amperage monitoring on most of their. I don't. I mean, you could convert it, of course, but yeah, I don't think you can do that. Um, the virtual outlet turns off my ATK for only 5 minutes. When it turns on when I still do tank, does it keep it off as long as I need? I'd have to take a look at your programming. I don't have an answer for you. If it's only 5 minutes, then you have something that's deferring something for 5 minutes, unfortunately. So for virtual outlets, by the way, I didn't show you where they are. So in a newer Apex, it's really simple. You just go up to here, you go to the outlet button, and then you go to the plus button on the upper corner here, add a virtual outlet. And then you can name it whatever you want, and then it will just show up. That's how you add a virtual outlet. Um, I use virtual outlets for all kinds of things. There's so many things you can use it for. As I said, I have a virtual outlet for a skimmer. So let me show you this one. This is a really nice one that I have. So I have in both of my skimmers, I have a switch that tells me when the skimmer is full. And for some of you out there, such as myself, I don't want to get an alert every hour that my skimmer is full. I only want to get that alert a couple times a day because it's not important enough for me to know when the skimmer is full to right away go over there and fix it. So what I did was I made a virtual outlet that only alerts me at certain times of the day. So it'll alert me at 8 o'clock, at 11 o'clock, or noon, at 3 o'clock. So this outlet only will turn on during that period of time. So what I do is I then tie the virtual outlet to my alarm. Okay, so here's my virtual outlet to tell me the times in which I want you to tell me that my skimmer is full, and then I go to my email alert here, and my virtual outlet, if outlet, let's see where it is, if outlet, probably probably skipped it, there it is. If output skimmer full is on, then on. So what this means is my email alert will not come on unless my skimmer full virtual outlet is on, and my skimmer full virtual outlet only comes on during certain periods of the day. So that's how I was able to do a virtual outlet for this. And I have a lot of those. I have RO status, I have Reef aminos low, I have all these different virtual outlets that only come on during certain periods of the day for me if they're not important for me to get alerts consistently. So that's why I do it this way. Otherwise, I'm going to get alerts constantly. And this way I can kind of budget when I want certain alerts to come on and if they're important enough. Sandra, I don't believe there is a limit to virtual outlets. I have tons of them and I've never gotten close. Let's see. What are the 6 switches for? Do I need to buy a breakout box? Gary, the recommendation would definitely be a breakout box, unless you want to pin out that little pin, which is very difficult. I think Harry Singer makes those breakout boxes and pins those out for you. Well, SpinSense, it's not endless. I mean, you can have 48 modules, I believe, on an Apex system. So you could have 48 potential PM1s, which would mean you can have 48 breakout boxes. What kind of switch do you use in the skimmer? I just use a float switch, or I'm sorry, I use an optical switch now. In my, I have a skimmer collector, and then I just have an optical switch in there, or an optical sensor. So I hope that explained virtual outlets. They can be used for many different things. So you can see kind of how I'm using them with the conjunction of profiles. So I know I went through it pretty fast, but I mean, you could pretty much do anything. Most of the time, virtual outlets are used so that you can get alarms at certain points that you don't want to get alarms, or get an alarm only during if something else is happening. It has never gotten too dirty. I've been using optical. I've had that conversation a few times on the stream. I've had really good luck with optical switches. You know, as long as you keep them clean. I mean, once they get hit by the dirty water from the skimmer, you're cleaning out the skimmer anyways. So at the same time, you clean the optical sensor. Can you explain more about the breakup? What wires should go where because there are 8 ports? Okay, so think of it like I said before. You have a wire here and a wire here. Okay, that wire, there's no positive or negative. It's just wire and wire, and you want those 2 wires to connect. That's your breakout box. So on the 8 ports of the breakout box, there's 2 connections. Each connection is that wire. Think of it like you're just taking a wire and you're cutting it, and then you want to put it back together. That's what the ports are. So the ports are actually physical connections telling this wire and this wire, I want you to connect to each other. Okay, so the ports recognize when this wire and this wire have connected, and it's called continuity. That's the actual word for it. A continuity of a wire is when a wire and another wire are touching each other, and it makes a complete circuit. So with a breakout box, if you have, let's say, a doorbell, or you have a button, or you have something that when you push it, it takes 2 connections and puts them together. The breakout box then will tell you, I have those connected now, so I want you to do something. I hope that explains it. I don't know if there's any better way to explain it. Rogue, what's going on, man? Hey, Desert Reef, why don't you do something and help these people with breakout boxes? Because Desert Reef installs AV equipment with me, so he should be able to help you. But you know, he doesn't do anything for us in the channel, so maybe he could help someone. Let's see. How are you running a heater, Apex controller, AFI shutoff only? Um, so the recommendation has always been that you put a controller in between the Apex. So you have your heater, controller, Apex. That way you have a backup. That's the right way to do it. Um, that's how I would do it. So that way you have kind of a backup. I didn't do any videos in depth on profiles. I think I did do one video on profiles. I guess I could make a video on what each profile does and how to do them. To be quite honest with you, Mark, profiles are kind of a thing of the past. They're not used as often anymore because Apex has given us so much programming code now where we don't really need to use them as much. All of the new Neptune products pretty much have everything we need to not even require us to do profiles. Uh, nope. Noble Reef, they have not customize the alerts. However, they have made them more informative. Back in the day, they used to just say alarm. Now they actually say alarm and pH is too high. So, but they haven't done anything on that. I would hope one day they will do something on that. That would be great. But yeah, Brian just made a good point. You can customize the alert by renaming the outlet. Then it will say so and so outlet is on. Um, but I mean, that would be probably the easiest way. Tia Tell, welcome. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. Once we get, I don't know, I think we got to get 1,000 subs or something. We'll have some super chats and some fun stuff on the YouTube. But right now we don't have that, unfortunately. It's more just me just talking. Sometimes I have people on, sometimes I don't have people on. It really just depends. So, um, So what I'll do, because someone asked, is I'll just kind of go through profiles, not real quick, but I'll kind of explain. So you have, I think it's 30 something profiles. I think it's like 36 or it might be 40 profiles. I don't remember exactly. A profile, think of it like an override. That's probably the best way to explain it. A profile will override whatever you're having your outlet do for whatever period of time. Like you could put if time something something then profile, or you could say if pH is high, go to profile. So a profile is technically an override. Okay, now it gives you a different things. Like we were talking about dosing, you could have a doser here that overrides your dose program and does something different during a certain period of the day. You can also program this just if you have an outlet that's a dose, and it will turn on and off the dosing based on what you put in here. Um, Again, think of a profile like an override. I think that's the best way to explain it. There's a number of different ones. So they have a pump. You can have a pump go to a specific amount during that period of time. This would be used for generally your 0 to 10 volt. You know, um, Radeon is specifically for Radeon. This will, like I said, override whatever your Radeon program is and just send it something right away and it gives you a ramp time and the starting of the ramp and the overall ramp. This is just a standard ramp, so like I said, you would use this for 0 to 10 if you wanted to ramp something. So this is for a Hydra, if you have a Hydra or an HD. This is for a Vortec. So if you wanted to override your Vortec program with something, such as a feed mode, let's say, you wanted when feed mode is on, go to this. This would be another use for a profile. This is for if you have a wave pump. And this I never use, but this is weather for Radeons. This will basically just override the weather of the Radeon. I hope that explained profiles. Like I said, they're not used very often, unfortunately. They're static amounts, like my reef pick, I want it to go to a specific spectrum until I turn it off. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's going to take time. I've only been doing this since January. So, I give away stuff, hoping that, I'll get more people in. Um, and yeah, it just takes time. So, I've been on a lot of other channels, and I got a lot of friends in the industry now. But you got to remember, um, what we talk about is very foreign to a lot of people. So, unfortunately, a lot of people are scared of automation. They're scared of what I'm doing. They're scared of touching any of this stuff. Um, but when it really comes down to it, it's quite easy if you do basic stuff. Again, I do a lot of advanced stuff, but it's really simple if you're just doing basic stuff. Yeah, so Mark, that's exactly what it's for. You turn on the profile, it overrides whatever else is going on, and then you can turn it back off. So my reef pick, I manually turn that on, and then I manually turn it off. So once I go back to auto, that indicates my Radeon, which is right here, LED, to go back to the schedule. So as long as none of these are doing what they're doing, it will automatically go back to my schedule. Correct, Anthony. You need a WXM for all of the stuff for Ecotech. That's correct. Does not work with Vectras. For those that don't know, it does not work with Vortex, with Versus, which, you know, of course, Neptune and Ecotech are not going to play nice because they're competing products. Um, and now with Neptune making a light, it's going to become even more apparent that Ecotech and Neptune are going to not communicate as much any longer. So, like I said earlier in the stream, I am changing some stuff out in my system, and I'm going all Neptune now. I'm not doing anything else. And the reason I'm doing that is because of what I just told you. Is eventually, from my understanding, is there's going to be a lot of stuff that is not going to work anymore. So I'm taking as much as I can out, with the exception of my lights and my wave makers, because I'm not getting rid of my MP40s, um, and putting everything Neptune. That's what I plan to do later today. I got a EB832, I got a new dose, and I got a new return pump, and I got a big cabinet that I'm putting in to clean up all my wiring on the wall in my garage. It's going to look really nice. I'm really excited. You're getting ready for your reef. I don't know what that says, Brian. I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely, coral lovers. You can do that. I don't have a core pump right now. I'm gonna have one here in about an hour or two after. But yeah, you can go into the core pump and go into the advanced, which is just like a dose. So let me go to one of my dose. So the core pump looks very similar to this. You go into the advanced, and you can put right here if your feeder is on, or you could put a time. You could say if time blah blah blah. Let's say 12. You already put that there, which is helpful. You know, then and then you'd have the profile there. So back in the day, they used to make you put a profile here, but now you can actually put percentage. So you could actually say 20, then 20, um, which would mean if time, then put my core pump to 20% or whatever, if that makes sense. Let's see. Same thing, switch in Neptune, go into the core. Somewhat off topic, but do you have a recommendation for battery backup and power outages? I'll go over that in a second. Video, agree with video it. Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't learned how to edit videos. I'm sure some of you guys have seen my videos. They're completely raw. I just record them and just throw them on there. I don't even look at them sometimes. But to build the cabinet and rewire everything, I think it's going to take me maybe 2 or 3 hours, and I don't think anyone wants to see a 2 or 3 hour video. So I don't know. I might take just some pictures of before and after, maybe some pictures in between. I don't know what I'm going to do. What's going on, Corey? Uh, there is Reefing Ravi. I can show you that. Getting ready. I don't know what that says. Saved on outlets. Yeah, that's definitely going to save me on outlets because now I'm going to have the 3 new one links from the EB832. All right, so reefing Ravi. This will only work with specific gyres. I do not know if it will work with your particular XF280. You will have to find out, but this is it. This is the gyre interface module for Neptune. This plugs into your V1 ports, okay? We can look and see if it would work with this particular one. Works with the 1K ice cap gyro pump. Now they make a number of different ones, so you might have to find a specific one for your particular pump. Let me see if they have one for your particular pump. And then, yeah, it tells you how to program them too. Okay, so these are the ones they work with. XF 130, 230, 150, 250, 1K, 3K. Those are the ones they work with. You have a XF 280, so I don't think it'll work with it. But they do have, just to answer your question, they do have it. So my program said if time is XX ramp to a speed, if time is, oh, the time. Yeah, that's a good way of using the profiles as well. Yeah, Mark, I don't think Neptune's ever going to do that. Well, Ravi, unfortunately, a lot of companies make products that are expensive that don't work with Apex. It's just, you got to remember, Apex started with a controller. They started with a controller, a pH probe, and a temp probe, and outlets. And now they're making wave makers. Now they're making lights. Now they're making pumps. They're making dose pumps. They're making, you got to remember, at the beginning, they didn't make any of this stuff. So all these other companies were like, hey, I'm going to make an interface so I could use my Neptune on it. But then Neptune said, you know what, screw you guys. We're going to make our own stuff. So all these other companies started bowing out because they don't want to compete with Neptune. And furthermore, all these other companies like CoralView and Ecotech and, I can keep going. I mean, there's all these companies now that are making their own controllers. So why would they interface with Neptune? It would just not be financially the right thing to do. And I understand why they're doing it. Unfortunately, that makes you have to buy Neptune equipment. And it's unfortunate, but that's just, that's just how business works. I have, you know, I have Crestron in my house, which is my home automation system, and only Crestron products will work with it typically. And as more and more companies make products to compete with Crestron, Crestron's going to fight back and make their own products so that you are forced to buy their products. I do not use the dose for auto water change, Anthony. I use liter meters. I have a whole video on liter meters. I love them. When I do my new cabinet, I'm going to put the liter meters up and make them all nice. And I'm really excited to make my wire mess. It's not really a wire mess, but make it look nice with some cord tubing and all kinds. I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. But I'm excited. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but I'm gonna have to move my RO pumps around. I'm gonna have to move the stupid reef pot higher or lower. I don't know yet. Yeah, Desert Reef. That's exactly what they're for. Breakout boxes are strictly for buttons or contacts, leak sensors, anything that has a contact. So, like, let's say you had a security sensor on a window and you wanted to know when the window's open. Window opens, breakout box takes those two wires and puts them together. Apex then recognizes that those wires are put together. You cannot use a liter meter on a calcium reactor similar to that of the dose question. The liter meter is not a continuous pump, so it will wear out. Yeah, so finally, Desert Reef Aquatics has given us valuable information in the chat. So we all are going to clap. And stay tuned because every week there's going to be um, a special post what Desert Reef Aquatics is doing that week. Last week he was part of the he had a fish tank desk. I don't know what he's going to have next week, but stay tuned in the Facebook group. Okay, so we're at about an hour. I don't want. I got a lot to do today, as I said. I got a ton of stuff to do on the fish tank. So, um, for all those that are late to the party, we are giving away a reef. I'm sorry, Poseidon Reef Systems Fido tank. This is what I use. This is what I recommend for everybody that's interested in doing Fido. Again, I always say this in all my live streams. I'm not sponsored by these people. I'm not sponsored by Neptune. I'm not sponsored by anybody. They're not paying me to sell this stuff. I buy this with my own money and I give it to you guys because I want you guys to succeed in the hobby. So just remember, this is what I use. I recommend it. I have a video on it. I think it's fantastic. This is just a starter kit, so you can do all kinds of stuff with this, by the way. The Camor, also a terrific a doser for calcium reactor. Yeah, Coral Lover, that's a strange situation because I have heard the Versa will pull from quite a far amount, so I'm a little surprised you're having that problem. So the topic today, which we never got to, which is okay, um, was the 10 most important automation equipment. Okay, so we're gonna kind of go through that, and again, for those that want to be entered in the contest, you have to ask a question, and you have to say "I love Reef Automation" in the stream. I have the list here. There's quite a few people that have entered the contest but have not asked a question. So, unfortunately, if you do not ask a question, I am going to have to delete you from the list. So, just want to make sure you understand that. Um, Also, some of these people might have come in earlier and then left, and then they come back, which is fine, but, you know, I think you guys need to just be part of it in order to win. That's my opinion. Okay, so I'm gonna go over my top things, and I would like for you guys to comment on if you think I'm lying or not lying, if I'm wrong, and maybe give me some other ideas that could be on your top 10. So I think the number one most important thing on a fish tank is an auto top off. I think that is the most important thing on a fish tank in terms of automation. So again, we're going over what's the most important automation equipment, not the most important piece of equipment, the most important automation equipment. Okay, so I think ATO is going to be um, an ATO. Desert Reef Aquatics, I've given away tons of bulk reef supply gift cards, so uh, we don't have to reach 60 people, but yeah. Um, so yes, ATO I think is number one. Number two is a controller, any type of controller. It could be a Apex, it could be a GHL, it could be anything, any type of controller, anything that monitors your tank. It could be any type of monitor. I think that is the number two thing that you need to have on a fish tank for automation purposes. Okay, so far those would be my two recommendations. My third would be a heater controller or a chiller controller of some form. JBJ makes a nice one. Inkbird has one. If you don't have a controller, I think that's an important thing to have, and that's a heater controller or chiller controller of some sort. Um, I don't know what Desert Reef Aquatics is saying now. Just follow Desert Reef Aquatics on Instagram, because if I don't say that, he gets mad at me. You guys can give him crap on his Instagram, and that'll make me happy. Let's see. the I think the third most important thing is some form of a wave maker. Now it can be even those old wave makers where they had the bars and they would turn on pumps at certain times of the day. A wave maker or a wave, some type of controller for flow, I think is an important automation equipment in your fish tank. Um, Another important thing I would recommend for anybody out there is some type of lighting control or timer, something that turns off your lights at a certain time, something that turns on your lights at a certain time. It could be, most lights nowadays that are LEDs have full controls with timers and whatnot. But if you didn't have that, you would need something to monitor when the lights come on and off. So you need some type of timer. TTL, that was my third thing, would be a heater controller or a chiller controller, would be my third top thing. Um, let's see. So those are some of the ones that I've come up with. I think another important automation type equipment would be to have a leak sensor of some sort. It could be, there's companies out there that make leak alarms where if you just put a leak sensor on the ground, it gets water on it and makes this loud noise. Even that's better than not having any leak sensor. So I think that's important. Um, yeah, I control 3 tanks as well, as Brian knows. Yeah, coral lovers, I think that's a good one. I think an auto feeder would be a good thing. I don't think it's the most important because you manually can feed your fish. Um, when I'm thinking of most important automation, I'm thinking of things that you have to have if you're trying to automate equipment to make your life easier. I think an auto feeder would definitely be on that list. I don't think it's as important as the ones that we mentioned, but I think that's a good one. Um, Water level sensors, I think that's actually a very good one, Chris. I think that's perfect. That's perfect. Um, So water level sensors would be a great one to have in a tank of some sort. Reef and Ravi, I feed 50 milliliters of Fido throughout the whole day. Courtney, we had Brian on our live stream last week, so you can see his whole system. I don't remember what we saw specifically, but we had his whole entire setup on the stream last week. Reefing Ravi, it is live Fido, and it is what I'm giving away. I have a video on how I'm dosing Fido. There's an actual video on it. Producer Reef, I don't think alarms are technically an automation piece of equipment. I'm thinking of just equipment. Yeah, Tia Tell, I said that earlier. I said lighting on a timer. That was one of the ones I said. Um, Let me look at this over here. I had a list earlier, and then we got carried away. Um, let's see. So I think this one's up for debate, but I think an auto tester is starting to become a important automation piece of equipment on a fish tank. I think as time goes on and more companies make them, and as they get cheaper, that's going to become a standard like an ATO. I really believe that. I really believe, kind of like a pool where, people have pools, they want to test their water quality all the time on pools, and anything that can automate that, which, most of those controllers nowadays do, is just huge for people with pools. So uh, I believe deep down that eventually auto testing is going to become a standard piece of equipment for most people. Battery backup. That's a great one, Sleet Stack. Battery backup. I would say that is a consideration for a piece of equipment that's important. I don't know if it's considered an important automation piece of equipment. I'm trying to kind of differentiate the two. Um, let's see. Wired something I've been begging to figure out without display unit. uh, What's going on, Bob? I've never seen you in the stream, so welcome. You have a question that's been asked a few times, and my recommendation will always be optical sensors. I find that float switches actually fail more than optical sensors due to buildup. So my recommendation is always optical sensors because they're easy to clean, and I've only had one bad optical sensor out of the tons that I have. Um, Anthony, flow sensors are a good thing, but again, you need to have a controller to use a flow sensor. I don't, unless I'm mistaken, there's not many companies out there that make flow sensors that give you the flow via like a phone or something. I could be wrong. I've never seen one. But that would be, that would be a okay, most important. I don't know if it's most important, but that is a good one for sure. Yeah, core lovers, like I said, as the time goes on and they get cheaper, I think auto sensor, if we're talking about the most important things for automation, let's say we had a top five. Right now, auto testers are definitely not in the top five, just due to price. But let's say they start to become cheap. Let's say they start to be, you put something in your fish tank and it tests every parameter, kind of like Mindstream was kind of doing, and it costs $100. I think everybody will spend the $100 like they'll spend on an ATO. That's just my opinion. Well, Desert Reef Aquatics, you shouldn't have an eel in a 20-gallon tank, so that's on you. Let's see. Automating skimmer. Yep. Yeah, I think that's an important piece of equipment. I'm sure people out there would agree. Some type of skimmer alert is probably an important automation equipment. Um, I would say anything that tells you when your skimmer is full would be helpful. Maybe an alarm. I think that's important. Absolutely. Because sometimes in some people's equipments or some people's systems, skimmer is what's given us all the oxygen for the fish. Some people's systems don't have, for instance, don't have a lot of surface agitation, so they need a skimmer to keep up with oxygen. So skimmers sometimes can be the most important piece of equipment in your tank in terms of oxygen exchange. So 20. Okay, so you have an eel and a 55, whatever, dude. Um, how big of a battery backup would you get? I have this question asked quite a lot, James. I think that Neptune needs to make a battery backup. I think everyone feels kind of the same way I do. That is made specifically for their equipment. I use the standard APCs that you get for computers for most of my AC powered stuff. For any of my DC powered, such as my wave pumps, my skimmer is AC powered still. My pumps are mostly DC, but then they're getting power from the Aquabus, which is AC. So um, putting a battery backup on your EB8 is fine with an AC battery backup, such as an APC or a computer one. Um, and for Ecotech, I use their battery backup. And my recommendation for everyone is to use the battery backup that the manufacturer recommends for their product, especially if it's a DC powered device. Could you use the Apex to monitor pH in a saltwater pool? You absolutely could. There's no reason why you couldn't. I know people that use Apexes on pools, actually. Yeah, that would be good to know when your UV sterilizer bulb was out. Absolutely. How many watts do you recommend for a UPS? Okay, so typically, typically UPSs are measured in, I think it's called volt amps, or I don't remember what the word is, but it basically is how much power the battery will be able to maintain when it's in battery mode. So you don't generally look at watts when you're looking at a UPS. I've found, and there's actually been studies, and I think BRS has done studies, that typically in most of the equipment that we have, 1,000 VA is probably your good you're good with a 1,000 VA. Um, Most of my APCs, like I have a 750 over here, and I think I have a 1500 over here. Um, I don't think you need to worry too much about wattage, especially on a fish tank, because I mean, I'd have to see your tank, coral lovers, but most people's tanks are not drawing a lot of wattage. LEDs don't drive a lot of wattage. DC pumps don't generate a lot of wattage. Heaters really would be your big thing. If you have T5s, if you have something like metal halides, if you have something that is drawing a lot of watts, are those things going to be on the battery backup? Let's put it that way. Like if you have a chiller, is that going to be on your battery backup? I don't know. It might be, but it generates a lot of wattage. Generally, a battery backup should only be, you should only put stuff into the battery side of the battery backup that you want on the battery side, such as the lower power devices like a return or like a skimmer. Those are important things that if the power fails, obviously a wave maker or power heads, all low wattage devices. So those will last for hours on a standard battery backup. So we're at about an hour and 15. I'm gonna go through this list and I'm gonna yell at a couple people. Well, I'm not gonna yell at them, but I'm gonna give them some crap. Scott Neat entered the contest but never asked a question. If Scott Neat is still here, Eddie Lush, you never asked a question, sir. Um, let's see who else we got on here. I guess Chris, you're fine because you gave us some important information. Corwin Myers Reefs never asked a question. Hatfields Reef never asked a question. Cardiff Reefer never asked a question. Um, it's just not. Unfortunately, I have rules for the contest. I'm giving away some high dollar devices, so I want you guys to be participating in the stream if you're going to be entered into the contest. I only think it's fair for everybody else, and I hope everyone understands that I'm trying to be fair. So for those people that I just mentioned, if you wouldn't mind asking any question that would be pertinent to the conversation, that'd be correct. That'd be good. Um, you make a program to run the Trident. You cannot, Scott. Uh, I think Neptune gets this question a lot, and they kind of just get mad. But no, you don't count Desert Reef Aquatics. Scott, I think that there's something. It's one of two things, and I'm not going to harp on this, but I think I honestly believe that no matter what they say, they are trying to sell reagent. I really believe that, and I really believe that if they're running four times whatever it is a day, I bet you there's a way that they can make it run once or twice a week. I think they're trying to sell reagent. That's my honest opinion. But on the flip side of that, I have read that most of the tridents that are being not shut down properly and being stored and then being ran back up is that the reagent is getting clogged or is breaking the pumps from not, I guess, not being used. So I guess the flip side of that can be, well, maybe you have to run the reagent through the system in order for it to maintain proper usage. I don't know, but currently that's how they have it. Fellow Reefer, I never mentioned your name. Finally got an Apex, gonna try to get it set up. Awesome, Sleeve Stack. Well, today I'm gonna be pretty busy, so I won't be able to help you. But ask me if anytime if you need any help. Yeah, Brian, I don't see the need to run calcium twice a day, or magnesium for that matter, twice a day. Want to use a float switch to shut skimmer off cup get now float gets short get is short. How do I extend it going to tie it in the bob? Yeah, you could splice that. It's just an electrical signal. So I get that. I get these questions asked a lot about wiring and how long they are. And you got to remember these are just wires, so you can cut them. Can't cut. I want to rephrase that. Do not cut ORP probe wires or salinity wires. Those are special shielded, specific ohm rated wiring. You can't cut those. But anything that's electrical, you can just cut it and extend it. So if it's a speaker wire, you can just cut it and extend it. If it's an optical sensor, you can just cut it and extend it. You know? All right, Hatfields, I'll give you a pass. Is there a way to see what devices are connected to a feed cycle without checking all the devices program? Chris, you can go to summary. If you go over to here, top right here, and you go to summary, this will show you all of your programming. So you can see all your devices here. And then if you go down, you can see all your programming. And if you're familiar with the shortcut, I believe it's Control F. You could just type in feed, and it will search the page for feed. Okay, and then you could find it. So I think it's Control F in Chrome. I don't know what it is in other browsers, but that's the easiest way to do it. Oh, the screw is too short. Okay. Yeah, I would just get another one. Yes, fellow reefer, that's kind of what I said. I mean, that's what they're saying, and that's what I'm seeing online, is that if you don't have it continuously testing, that it's going to clog. Um, we're just going to have to go with what they're saying, right? I mean, we can't deny it, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, right now we can't get reagents anywhere, so it would be nice to be able to test it once a week or twice a week or whatever. Could you talk about setting up a saltwater? I'm assuming that's SWC saltwater station more in depth. Juan, can you give me just a little more information what you'd like to know? Yeah, Corwin, I'm a big proponent of optical sensors. I get this. I get these people always arguing with me over sensors, and I really think that optical sensors are the most accurate and last longer. I think float sensors just have more of an issue, so I only use optical sensors. Let's see. So yeah, so we're gonna let me go back to the list of people. And yeah, Cardiff Reefer, if you're still here, I am gonna delete you from the contest. You didn't ask anything. Uh, Optical sensors cannot be used with the breakout box. Now, let me rephrase that a little bit. The optical sensors require power, just a small amount of power. And I do not know what the power consumption is. If you cut an optical sensor, you'll see there's four wires. There's the sense wire, which is the two wires, and then there's the power connector. There's a ground and a power. So if there's a way that you can power that optical sensor, and I haven't tried this, then technically you could use the optical sensors with the breakout boxes. But I don't know how to specifically do it because I've never done it. I think it's cheaper just to buy an FMM and call it a day. Daniel J. Brandriff did not ask a question. So if you're still here, you will need to ask a question. Eh, yeah, I don't remember that, Cardiff. That's my apologies. I appreciate you being honest and coming back and telling me that I'm not being honest. I asked earlier the best Apex controllable fuge light. I don't know. I think that any fuge light that you can plug into an outlet is the best Apex controllable fuge light. So I would say a Kato Max is a nice one. It's really small. Even just a light bulb from Home Depot is a good fuge light. I'm not going to go into it too much because there's many different options for a controllable fuge light. Really, all you need it to do is turn on and off. You know. All right. So let me go back through this list again. Can I install optical sensor to run my Clarity? Only use the motor from it. I guess you could, Coral Lover. I don't. I have a Claricy and I get really annoyed when the alarm goes off on that stupid thing because I can't hear it because the alarm is so weak on that. I mean, you could use an optical sensor anywhere, and then plug the outlet into it. So as I was saying, Daniel hasn't asked a question. Eddie Lush hasn't asked a question. Scott Neat hasn't asked a question. So those three are going to be removed, unfortunately, unless they tell me I'm lying. Okay, so you want a dimmable one. Okay, so my recommendation, and I know this is a little pricey, would be to get the AI Fuge Light. Because the AI can be controlled via IoTA or Internet of Things, and the Apex will then control your AI Hydra or your AI. So my recommendation would definitely be an AI. They make a specific Fuge Light, and then you can adjust the dimmability. Again, it's a little pricey, but I think that's the best option. And I'm sure people would agree with me on that. I don't know of many dimmable Fuge lights. Would I ever consider doing the Zeovit method? I have done the Zeovit. Yep, I'm lying. See, it's I got a lot of people on this list. Um, yes, AI integrates using the IoTA method or Internet of Things. So all you have to do is plug it in and go into your Neptune and add it as an IoTA method, which I can actually show you real quick. If you go up to your Apex and you go right over here, there's nothing to plug in. It's 100% wireless. So you go over to tasks right here and IOTA, attach an IOTA device. And that's how you can get your AI. You click on this and then it will find it on your network and then that's all you got to do. It's very simple. To the ZeoVit. Yeah, I've used ZeoVit. I used it probably 8 years ago when I first learned about it. Then I stopped it after about 5 months because there were so many other things that were easier. I just can't dose a billion things all day. I just don't have time. I'm using a balling method now, which seems to be working really well. We'll find out because I'm going to send in an ICP if they're open and check my water. I do not know the answer to that, Coral Lovers. If you're not familiar, Clara C is distributed by Ecotech Marine, so you could just call Ecotech Marine and ask them. And I'm assuming they'll know that. You could probably pull the motor, and I'm assuming it would have some type of voltage or amperage on it somewhere in there, but I don't know the answer to that. All right, let me get back to this list. So Daniel never said anything. I think he popped in and then left. That's my thinking. I think Scott Neat did the same thing. So that's what I think. I know Daniel's usually in all the streams, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm going to remove him. Um, so anyway, let me move this over. I use the Aquaforest, which is the balling method. Okay, getting pretty late here. We got about an hour and a half, and I got a ton of stuff to do today. So let me switch over the stream here. So here's the list for today. I appreciate everybody that came. If you're not on the list, you either didn't enter the contest at the beginning and did not ask a question. So in order to be entered into the contest, you have to say the magic words and ask a question. Furthermore, if you came in right at the end, I'm not going to put you on the list because it's just not fair to everyone else that's been sitting here for an hour and a half with me. So take a look at the list. If you're not on there, I'm going to give us about a minute or two and let me know you don't see your name, and we will fight over why you don't see your name. And I even was nice and put Desert Reef Aquatics on here, even though I shouldn't have. I did it anyways because I'm a nice guy. Thanks, Robbie. I hope I help people, as much as I try. Today I didn't really have anything planned specifically. I just some weeks I just don't see anything. Carrie Reefer 500. There is probably a reason why you don't see your name because you never said the magic phrase, sir. And I don't know if you got in late or not, but I didn't see you until the end here. Screen's too small? I'm sorry. Let me give this some juice. There you go. Noble Reef, you're on there, my friend. Right here. Sorry. Let me scroll back to. There we go. There's our list today. Corwin, I don't think so. It's not going to be really advanced. It's just going to be a cabinet with mounting my wiring, so you don't see all the wiring in the garage. I'm sure you guys have seen. Actually, my Reef Automation avatar or icon is the picture of which I'm removing all that stuff and putting a cabinet in its place. I don't think I need anything specific. So anyway, so we're gonna do the contest. Um, and like I said, Carrie Reefer, we start our streams at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I don't know if you were here earlier. I apologize, but it's just not fair to others if I let people come in right at the end and get entered into the contest when they've been sitting here for an hour and a half. If you were here since the beginning, then I apologize, but I never saw you say I love Reef Automation, and unfortunately, that's part of the rules of the contest. Um, so uh, it's just I try to be fair and honest with people, and I'm giving away, I give away stuff that's pretty expensive, so I want it to be fair for others. Noble Reefer, absolutely, anytime, man. We, we're having MACNA here in Phoenix, and I'm hoping that I can have some type of, I don't know, little get together. I just don't know with this whole coronavirus thing. Um, Tiatel, you don't see your name because you didn't say the magic phrase. Although you did ask a lot of questions, so I'm gonna give you a pass. What wireways do you like to use? I don't use wireways, Anthony. I think it's 2 streams ago. If you look at my 2 stream ago, I did a wire management stream, which I talked about all the different things that I use for wire management. Um, and I don't remember what I specifically talked about, but take a look at that. Yeah, Desert Reef Aquatics, for those that don't know, is one of my friends that I like to give crap to on every stream. I welcome everybody else to do the same thing, including in the Facebook group. Uh, but he is here in Arizona and he has an Instagram as well. And he always wants me to talk about it, so I'm talking about it. And I would like to take him off the list here, but I'm too nice. And he built pretty much all of my cabinetry. So for those who've seen my videos, he did all the cabinetry. So he did my cabinetry for my 300. He did my cabinetry for my reef tank in my kitchen, and he built all that for me. So even though I give him crap, he did some pretty darn cool things in my house for me. All right, let's do this contest already. All right, so today again we're giving away a Poseidon Reef Systems basic kit, which will get you going with reef phyto culturing. I use it, I love it. Um, so yeah, anybody that has any questions on it, Elliot, the owner, is fantastic. You can give him a call, and good luck to everybody. Here we go. All right, today's winner is SpinSense88. So SpinSense88, if you are in the stream, please say hello. And congratulations, sir or ma'am. I don't know if you're a woman or a man, but congratulations nonetheless. And as usual, if SpinSense decided to leave us, we will do it again. But I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. There he is. Awesome, man. Okay, so for those that don't know, you have to be part of our Facebook group. I'm assuming and hope that everyone here is part of the Facebook group. I'm going to type it right now for you guys. Um, and SpinSense, for if you don't know, my real name is Derek Picker. I need you to find me. I am the moderator, of course, of the group. So just PM me on Facebook after the stream, and I'll get your address and everything, and we'll get that shipped out to you as soon as possible. Um, so thank you, everybody, for spending your Saturday morning with me. I always appreciate it. I really do. If you haven't already, please like the stream after we're done today or during it, whatever. That really helps. And the more people we get, the more subscribers we get, the bigger the prizes are going to be, the more we're going to have fun. The streams are going to get more informative. We're going to get better questions. So I really want to start growing this some more. For those who don't know, I do this every week, and I usually give away all kinds of crazy stuff. Um, but please like the stream. Like I said, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And if you have some friends that are into reefing or not into reefing, just have them subscribe as well. The more people we get, like I said, the more we can have some fun. And again, I appreciate everyone spending their Saturday with me, and I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Have a great day. Everyone stay safe.